Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many people already checked into the webinar. Hello to anyone watching from YouTube. We are going to get started promptly at 7. I'm sure we'll have more people into the webinar as we get going, but we have a couple announcements and a lot to cover this hour. So first off, thank you for joining the Center for International Stabilization and Recovery, otherwise known as CISR, for our annual Global Humanitarian Week. CISR is a unique entity here at JMU as we work with JMU students and faculty, the U.S. Department of State, and with various other international partners in order to projects, trainings, and publications. CISR has employed over 350 JMU students throughout the years, with many going on to work at the U.S. Department of State and international NGOs around the world. In addition to publishing To Walk the Earth in Safety, which just came out yesterday actually, and the Journal of Conventional Weapons Destruction, both funded by the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Weapons Removal and Abatement, CISR has also held various senior management courses both on JMU's campus and abroad in Vietnam, Croatia, and Tajikistan, as well as managing international programs and trainings on disability rights, peer support, and mine-risk education. There are many ways to get involved with CISR, including joining CISR's student group, Dukes for Post-Conflict Recovery. Additionally, if these topics interest you tonight, we highly encourage you to check out our fellowship program in collaboration with the U.S. Department of State. You'll now see a slide with some information about the fellowship. The Fraser Cruzel Drew Memorial Fellowship is a 2-year paid professional opportunity. And please feel free to save these details and find more information on CISR's website. And finally, just a few housekeeping items before we begin. For those students that are seeking a passport stamp, please take a screenshot of the passport stamp slide shown at the end of this event. We will have a question and answer session following the panel. As you think of questions during the event, for those in the Zoom meeting, please send your questions to the host via the Q&A function that you'll see below. And for those watching via YouTube, you can leave questions in the comments and we'll make sure to get them. We likely won't have time to answer all the questions, but we'll answer as many as possible. And now on to our panel, which we're very excited to present tonight, moderated by Dr. Suzanne Federline, CISR's interim director. Suzanne has been with CISR for over 20 years and has directed CISR's senior management courses in ERW and Mine Action since 2004. Currently, she serves on the review board of the International Mine Action Standards and leads many of CISR's grant writing initiatives, and she's our wonderful moderator today. Suzanne, over to you.
Thank you, Brenna. Good evening, and thank you for joining us in what I know will be a very interesting discussion with our accomplished panelists. These are 3 women who are working in important leadership roles in an international humanitarian and security field of practice traditionally dominated by men, but certainly undergoing change as it evolves and matures. We'll explore what this means for these women, what changes are taking place across the sector, and what lessons and bits of advice they can share with students and young professionals considering their career options. With us this evening, we have Emma Atkinson, who is a branch chief at the Bureau of Political Military Affairs Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement at the U.S. Department of State. In this role, she manages a team of people responsible for implementing the United States conventional weapons destruction programs in East Asia and the Pacific, South and Central Asia, and Western Hemisphere. Additionally, Emma is a JMU graduate and an alum of CISR and the Fraser Cruzel Drew Memorial Fellowship. Our second panelist this evening is Elise Becker, who is Vice President of Operations at the Marshall Legacy Institute. Elise's primary duty at MLI is to develop, manage, and expand MLI's K9 Demining Corps campaign, which seeks to increase the quantity and quality of mine detection dogs in mine-affected countries around the world. Elise, too, is a former FKD fellow and a JMU alum with a bachelor's degree in international affairs and a master's degree in public administration from the University of Nebraska, Omaha. And our third panelist is Kristen Stevens, who is head of congressional affairs at the Halo Trust, one of Humanitarian Mine Action's biggest NGOs. In her position, Kristen leads the organization's advocacy and legislative engagement and has been instrumental in increasing funding for humanitarian mine action and the establishment of the Congressional UXO Demining Caucus. Kristen holds a Master's of Public Administration from American University and a Bachelor's in Political Science from Willamette University. These very brief snapshots of your current roles and a little bit of your background lead directly into the first question that I have tonight for you. What has been your career path up to your present position? And please briefly describe the work of your organization and your present role within that organization. Emma, would you like to start us off? Please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Fiedeline. It's really exciting to be here with everyone today, and with Elise and Kristen, who I've worked closely with, and with Kristen, we've done a number of Zoom events over the past couple of weeks. So it's really fun to share this discussion with such accomplished colleagues. But yes, as Suzanne said, I am a branch chief in the Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement, and I've actually had the privilege to work in mine action for my entire career. I graduated from JMU in 2009. And as Suzanne said, I started in a fellowship position at the State Department. And it's been really exciting to work in mine action for over a decade now, because I feel like I've gotten to see a huge amount of changes over the past decade. And so it's been really rewarding to work in a sector for this long and just sort of see the things that change over time. So that's been really great. The Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement that I work in, we're responsible for the U.S. government's, we are the U.S. government lead for programmatic and policy issues related to landmines. You heard at the opening from Brenna about a couple of different things that CISR supports us on, To Walk the Earth in Safety and the Journal of Conventional Weapons Destruction. Basically, we're responsible for dealing with anything related to conventional weapons around the world. And so the team that I manage specifically, we focused on East Asia and the Pacific, South and Central Asia, as well as Western Hemisphere affairs. So we get money from Congress to give out to international NGOs, just like Elise and Kristen work with, to implement programs around the world that help countries deal with the conventional weapons that are plaguing their particular country. So it's really great work. I've really enjoyed being in this field. And I think JMU gave me a great start to have success at the State Department. And I'm really excited to chat with everyone today.
Thank you. And Elise, turn to you next, please.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I just want to echo a lot of what Emma said. It's really a pleasure to be on this panel. I think this is a really interesting discussion, and I'm looking forward to it. So just briefly, like Emma, I was also an FKD fellow at the Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement, and I also have been in mine action for basically the entirety of my career. After finishing, at the time, was a one-year fellowship back in 2007. I moved to the Marshall Legacy Institute, where I remain today. I was first a program manager, and I'm now a vice president for operations. So just a quick background on the Marshall Legacy Institute, or MLI. We're a US-based nonprofit organization really focused on post-conflict recovery situations. And so our mandate is really to go in and provide the tools and training to countries coming out of conflict in order to have them kind of help themselves. The three mine action focused programs that we are most well known for, in which we've received wonderful support from Emma's office at the Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement, are our mine detection dog program, which is I'm primarily responsible for. Suzanne mentioned in her introduction that program really seeks to increase the use of dogs as a tool for landmine detection globally. And then to really focus not only on providing the dogs, but also providing very in-depth training to the dog handlers, to the entire support structure within mine action organizations within mine contaminated countries. Our second program in the mine action field is our Children Against Mines program. We've also received wonderful support from WRA for that program over the years. And that program seeks to really connect American school-age children with school-age children living in mine-affected communities around the world for virtual intercultural exchange, and then service learning projects focused on the landmine issue. And so that's been a really wonderful program. And then our Survivors Assistance Program is a program that provides medical and vocational assistance to landmine survivors in countries around the world. So really been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure for me to be here, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Elise. And Kristen?
Again, echoing the thanks so much, and so great to be part of this conversation today. In terms of my career path, I took a bit of a different route than my colleagues on the panel. Throughout my education, I interned at a range of NGOs and really enjoyed that experience, worked in state legislature for a while. But then really before I got into the field of Mine Action, I was teaching and coaching the competitive debate team at Western Washington University and worked there for about 4 years, really focusing on helping students develop communication and advocacy skills. And so for me, I kind of had taken my passion for international affairs and conflict issues, as well as the skill set that I had developed over time. Came to DC, got my MPA at American University, and partway through that program took an internship with HALO, and haven't left. It's been about 4 years since, just continuing to doing more and more for the organization. The HALO Trust is a very large humanitarian demining organization. We conduct landmine clearance as well as the removal of improvised explosive devices and other forms of explosive remnants of war from about 25 different countries and territories across the globe. So we've got a pretty expansive reach, and we employ about 8,600 staff or so worldwide. And as I mentioned, the core of our work is certainly demining, but we also do quite a bit of weapons and ammunition management to make sure that government-held weapons are safe and secure. And again, I want to echo the thanks to the Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement for all the support that they provide to the entire sector, not just to HALO, because the U.S. has been such an amazing champion for years and years, leading the globe in terms of support for these programs. So very grateful for that. And then, in my role as head of congressional affairs, I spend a lot of time talking to folks on the Hill, engaging Congress on demining issues and making sure that support is made available so that the U.S. can continue to conduct demining work all over the world and help save lives and rebuild livelihoods. And I also, in addition to directly interacting with the Hill, I also do quite a lot of work with grassroots advocacy and working with Americans across the country to make sure that we're getting constituents engaged on this issue as well. So thanks again for having me. Certainly To Walk the Earth in Safety, that CISR puts together is an incredible resource that certainly answers many of the questions I get from offices on the Hill. And so I'm always handing it out as much as I can and directing people to it because it's an incredible resource. Thank you.
All right, moving on. All very, very interesting to hear your backgrounds and how you came to be where you are now. So the next question is about the field of mine action. What are the main challenges facing the humanitarian mine action community today, or the conventional weapons destruction community? From your perspective, what do you see as the main challenges? And then additionally, specifically the pandemic this past year, how it has impacted the work of your organization and more generally the operations of the field of practice. Elise, would you like to start us off this time?
Sure. Yeah, I can go ahead and start off. So thinking about some of the challenges that I feel that the sector faces at this particular moment in time, certainly funding is always one. The State Department, U.S. government has been the most generous supporter of mine action, but there's only so much that can go around, and there's always continuing needs and new threats that pop up year after year. So that certainly is a challenge for many organizations. And just there's a lot more that we can do. There's a lot more we want to do, but there's only so much funding that's available. Another challenge I would see is resumption of that pops up from time to time of older conflicts. And an example that my organization is currently looking at right now is the Azerbaijan-Armenia war that resumed and concluded fairly quickly last fall. But not without a substantial amount of additional contamination. And so that's, a country where both countries that my organization has been involved in historically, and the level of contamination was at a pretty manageable level, and then all of a sudden, we're facing this huge addition of contamination. So that certainly is another challenge that we see to the sector. We think that we're making all this progress, and then whoops, something happens, and it's a horrible event, and there's a lot of loss of life and destruction of property, and people are who thought they were okay, then all of a sudden they're kind of back into this conflict zone. So that certainly is a challenge that's just part of the sector as well. And then the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to my colleagues in terms of challenges is, there's like Emma, I've been doing this for a long time, and so it's been really interesting to see all the different technologies that have been developed, particularly over the last 10 to 15 years. There's a lot of really awesome new tools that we can use and deploy to help accelerate the pace of mine detection and other explosive remnant of war detection and removal. Of course, my organization is really a big proponent of the dog, but there are tons of other technologies, animal and non-animal, that are very useful. And so I would say, a challenge is just, since some of this technology is relatively recent, a challenge is how do we get that technology more widely available to organizations that really need it, and to help clear these communities in a more efficient and effective manner. Thank you.
Kristen?
So just kind of building off of what Elise said, I agree with everything that was said. And certainly, HALO has been working in the Nagorno-Karabakh region for some time. And so certainly, we share those concerns, and, are certainly hopeful that we can all, as a sector, be able to clear that area and make it safe. So, just wanted to highlight that as well as a challenge. And then certainly from my perspective, working with Congress, my main goal is to help ensure that more funding is available. And like Elise said, it's tough because there's only so many resources that can go around. And, it's a demining, it's a landmine contamination can be solved. It's just a question of resources. And so, we just have to continue working as hard as we can to increase engagement to make sure those resources can become available and ensure the whole demining sector, is able to make as big of an impact as possible. One challenge that I find engaging Congress is just competition with other issues, which kind of relates to the previous point about just scarce resources that need to go to so many incredible programs, foreign assistance programs. I think it's a challenge sometimes to convince an office to make demining and mine action a top priority when often their constituents aren't, clamoring for that issue, or when they see just so many other issues that perhaps more directly they perceive to be impacting their constituents. So I think continuing to build constituent support and ensuring that people are reaching out to their members of Congress to express the need for additional resources and the desire for their members of Congress to be more vocal, be more active, and be more supportive is something that I think is really useful. And then specifically pertaining to COVID-19, certainly HALO's programs were impacted mostly towards the beginning of the pandemic, when it was suspending many of our programs and we were having to put new protocols in place to make sure our staff were safe. Certainly in some places it's still inhibiting travel a bit, but really HALO tried to use the pandemic as an opportunity to further provide support across the globe. And so we tried to implemented over nearly 10,000 projects in about 13 different countries, benefiting over 1.3 million people, to try to provide some additional relief when it came to pandemic response as well. So certainly has been a challenge, but HALO is an organization that wants to save lives and restore livelihoods, and certainly, these are activities that fall under that lane as well. So while we never want to completely divert from our core mission, we do try to respond as we're often called to do when there's natural disasters and floods and other challenges where some additional support can be useful for the communities in which we're working. So yeah, it has been a challenge, but something where we're trying to provide as much help as we possibly can. I know in Zimbabwe, we've started helping with vaccine distribution. And so I imagine that we'll start to see probably more of that type of activity moving forward where we can and where it's helpful for supporting the governments where we work.
Yeah, certainly the impact on the operations this past year with the pandemic has been significant, but I've always been impressed with how, after a brief sort of figuring out what to do next and how to go forth, the operators were able to proceed. Turning to Emma, as a donor, representative of a donor, I'm sure your perspective on this is a little bit different, and it'd be interesting to hear what you have to say, both about the challenges and specifically the COVID-19 pandemic challenge.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the greatest challenge that's always going to exist has already been stated, which is the resources. I mean, we see that on a daily basis. And I mean, the United States makes up for 1/3 globally of all the international contributions that go to Mine Action globally. So we are quite a large donor. But I think the challenges in the pandemic, this particular question, go hand in hand, because over the past couple of weeks, we've been contacted by a number of our implementing partners, international NGOs, who have said, hey, this donor is falling off. This donor can't come through. Is there any way the United States can step in and cover the gap for these teams? Because countries are suddenly having to deal with, not suddenly, but have been for the past year and a half, dealing with a pandemic that was obviously unplanned. Nobody knew that this was going to happen. So national budgets of all donors have really been stretched to go towards something that was not previously budgeted for. So that's been a real challenge. Thankfully, I do think that Congress and the Biden administration sees conventional weapons destruction as a priority issue. I think Mine Action has bipartisan support in Congress. Kristen experiences this on a regular basis with her work with the Hill. And we regularly hear from folks on the House and on the Senate side that this is something that they care about. But certainly resources will continue to be an issue. I think one of the other challenges for us is Mine Action is a very definable issue. As others have kind of alluded to, it's very quantifiable. Now, there certainly are those instances, as Elise already mentioned, where there's a resurgence of conflict and suddenly areas that we thought were dealt with or at a manageable level suddenly have new contamination, which is really unfortunate. But for the most part, we really get to see the impacts of our work immediately. I always say that I think Mine Action is one of the most rewarding fields to work in, at least in an immediate sense, because it's instant gratification. As soon as you get rid of a landmine or a bomb, that's one item that's not there to be, a fatal impact for a local population. Whereas other assistance fields, I think of education or health, it can take generations to see change in those areas. But a challenge in that is, how do we define success and how do we get to the end? Because the reality is in some types of contamination, I spent a number of years working on Southeast Asia. And in Southeast Asia, you have contamination that, though we are defining it's never going to be 100% gone. I mean, if you think of Europe, they're still digging up remnants from World War I and World War II. And so helping countries to create national capacities that can deal with what we call residual impact of conventional weapons that may remain is something that we're really interested in. We're really trying to do a lot of work on, but that's challenging because it requires us as a donor to have a conversation with the host nation about, hey, how can you start budgeting for this within your national budget? Because at some point, international funding is going to go away or not be at the level that it is. So how do we work together to create transition plans and glide paths for that? Other thing I will say about the pandemic on a positive side is I think it really has forced the State Department in particular to really use virtual tools. I mean, mean, prior to the pandemic, it was rare for a person at the State Department to telework. No one knew what Zoom was. Microsoft Teams, never heard of it. But suddenly, the State Department has all these amazing tools that I think the private sector always had. And I was speaking with a colleague the other day. I mean, I think we're having more conversations with folks in the field than we did pre-pandemic, because pre-pandemic it was like, well, we'll have those discussions in person when we take a trip out there, which is great. Certainly being around the table and getting to have face-to-face interaction you can't replace that. But there are things that can bridge the gap. And so that's been really exciting to see how all of us have adapted to use those tools. And I think that's certainly been for that piece has been for the better.
I want to turn now, switch gears a little bit to next questions on issues of gender diversity and inclusiveness. And I've been working in this field for quite some time as well, and certainly have seen it evolve, mature over time, as I was indicating. And one way it has is the focus on gender and the impact that gender does have, the differential impact that gender can have on how mine action manifests itself and how it impacts people. So I'm wondering how your gender has impacted your ability to work in the field and how you've sort of seen it play out in the field. And then other aspects of diversity and inclusion. As we all know, in Mine Action, we work with a great variety of people across many different countries, many different cultures and ethnic groups, and disabled people is a regular part of what we do, and diversity in many different dimensions. So Emma, if you would or Kristen, how about you start us off this time with how gender has impacted your work, how you see it playing out in Mine Action, and other aspects of diversity, inclusiveness, and how Humanitarian Mine Action is responding to that. Thank you.
Sure. And yeah, very, very big questions to try to tackle. But just, a few thoughts. For me personally, in the way that my gender has impacted my work on day to day, I would say I feel an enormous pressure to be perfect and overly prepared, in the way that sometimes there can be a perceptual difference in which women sometimes aren't taken seriously until they prove they should be, whereas that's not always the case for others. And so I would say that's something that is sometimes in the back of my mind. Certainly I'm in lots of meetings where I'm the only woman participating, but those are kind of the things that stick out to me that are coming up on a regular basis. But I will say I think things are improving in terms of more focus, in particular on gender, but I think also a bit of progress in some other areas as well. So that hopefully some of those things start to subside. More programmatically speaking, I think cultural sensitivities can be a real challenge if there are country contexts where it's not culturally traditional for women to take on roles in demining. And so our programs, Halo is making an enormous effort to hire more women in particular on our programs, and trying to make sure we find ways to do that in culturally sensitive ways. So in Afghanistan, for example, we will sometimes pair husband-wife partners together or families together to conduct the operations, because that is the way that it is culturally sensitive to conduct that work, and what our program has found to be successful in the past. And I think we're now starting to look to be a bit more creative in how we can be able to broaden opportunities to people in lots of different areas. So those are just a few thoughts. And I think we also, one thing we do is provide skills training to overcome skill gaps that might exist. So things like literacy and numeracy. Sometimes people might not apply or be able to apply for positions without those skills or think they'd be able to be successful. And so across our programs, we do try to provide that supplemental support if that would be a barrier for some people participating. So much more I could say. That's just scratching the surface, but just a few thoughts to kick it off.
Thank you. Very interesting. Emma, let's go with you next, please.
Great. Yes, this is a great question and so multifaceted. I think for me, it's been really interesting. When I first started in PMWA as a fellow, I think there were 5 program managers in the office who were, responsible for certain geographic areas of the world. And of the 5, there was one woman, and I was assigned to the woman. I'm not sure if that's because I was also a woman, but anyways, she was fantastic and really taught me a lot. And I think kind of gave me a mindset coming into the working world about how to view things. And one of the things that she really drove home for me was the importance of speaking up and asking questions, whether you're sitting at the table or you're at the back bench, not just so that your voice can be heard, but because that gives people around you permission to do the same. So that's something that I've really taken forward. Not always, hey, I'm not the smartest person in the room, I'll ask the dumb question or what I think might be a dumb question, and then it really gets things going. I think taking a more broad view for this sector as a whole, certainly I've seen huge changes in gender. And I think that PMWA at the State Department, this has been something that we're really watching and really interested in. And one of the things that we've done that I'm really proud of as a donor is we, over the past few years, have written into all of our grant requirements where we have gender and age reporting requirements. And that requires partners that we provide funding to not only to report on gender and age for the work that they're doing, but it also includes specific requirements about the employment of women, both as deminers at more senior levels within the organization. And I think that that's important because, as Kristen already mentioned, there are cultural contexts in all of the places where these programs are operating. And sometimes an NGO may have a great idea about how they're going to do something, but they may get pushback from local communities because of different cultural norms. And so I think it's really helpful on the donor side that when an NGO can say, hey, well, this is a donor requirement. How can we work together to meet this requirement so we can have this funding? And so I think that that's a really great example of how we've worked hand in hand with our implementing partners on an issue that is important to all of us, and providing the top cover to try and generate movement on some of these things that are really important. As far as broader inclusivity goes, a ton of work remains. And I think something that we try to think about at the State Department is, from where we sit, whether it's in the state that we live, the country that we live, the background that we were raised with, what's happening in our own country context is not the same as perhaps our Vietnamese colleague, right, on the ground in Vietnam. And so being really cognizant of how things are developing on the ground in the country we're trying to work is really important, because if we just come in blazing with our own ideas from our own complete point of view, from how we've seen things play out in our own country context, we may just totally lose people, right? Because it hasn't been tailored to the place where they are, which I think also leads into, this is why women's voices are really important, because they are members of the communities that we're serving and we're providing assistance to. I remember one of the first trips that I took with the office was to Afghanistan, and I went with 2 other colleagues who happened to be male. And when we went into communities, because I was a woman, I was allowed to speak with women in the communities, but my male colleagues weren't. And at the end of the days, when we would, share notes, the things that my male colleagues heard from men in the communities were vastly different from things that I heard from women in communities. And that just really showed me early on that we have a responsibility to make sure that all voices are heard. And that as a donor, we need to make sure that our projects are structured so that all of those voices, women, girls, all members of the community, are taken into account when we are attempting to provide assistance. So hope that is helpful.
Very much so. Elise?
Yeah, thank you. And it's just been fascinating to hear what Kristen and Emma had to say in response to this question, which I really kind of considered the sort of the meat of this discussion. And we're thinking about gender. I want to echo everything that they've said. Like Emma, entering, the mine action field as a young female at a time when there were far less women involved in this sector, I think certainly did present certain challenges, specifically related to my gender. So, Emma had mentioned going to Afghanistan. I have also traveled to Afghanistan, and I remember the first time someone wouldn't shake my hand visiting there because I was a woman, and thinking, okay, here we are. So, but you just kind of have to go with the flow, cultural sensitivity, and being understanding that you're in their culture, and so it's you kind of have to take off it's not a personal thing. It's just a cultural thing. Another thing I would add would be being in meetings. Emma and Kristen had mentioned, meetings. I think that, from my perspective, and having been involved in meetings for long number of years, is that there do tend to be differences in terms of communication styles, generally speaking, between men and women. So when you're the only woman, as I have often been, in a meeting full of men, it can be a little bit frustrating, and you really do have to learn to be adaptable. And I would say that that's one of the key lessons that I've come away with after a number of many rewarding years. I'm not saying this to be complaining, but these are some of the gender specific challenges to working in this sector. And then looking a little bit more, one other thing I will say about it is just also to echo what Emma had said about being a woman. When you're going to visit some of your programs, you actually have access to speak to the women who are some of your beneficiaries. And so you're able to, in certain cultural contexts, so you're certainly able to get more information and get a different perspective that is equally as valid as the male, in terms of how your program is going, how is it impacting women, and then getting back together and comparing notes with what you've heard back from men. And then just to talk a little bit more about from our organization, and then also just sort of the broader mine action sector. MLI, Marshall Legacy Institute, our programs that help survivors. We've really made a big push in recent years to ensure that we are really capturing in terms of people who need our help, medical assistance or vocational training in countries like Bosnia, Herzegovina, and also Yemen. That we are really actively seeking out women who need our assistance, and girls. And to go to Emma's point about the metrics reporting, I've seen that as a huge benefit to the community, that that we are reporting on the ages and on the genders of the people who are our beneficiaries in these countries around the world. I've also noted that a lot of international donors are now looking for you to as an applicant to really discuss how gender inclusivity, what are your plans for this program that you want to do? What is it that you're going to do in order to address gender and other diversity requirements? And so I think, having requirements by donors, when we're looking at these different cultures where, it might be a lot more difficult, not only for gender, but other forms of diversity that we might be looking to achieve, and cultures where we might run up against that. I think having the support of the donors saying, hey, well, this is what's required of us. And again, let's work together. Let's try to do this in a way that is not going to be completely antithetical to your culture, but that really allows us to fulfill what our donor is requiring, and really what our program wants to do. So I do see that these are a lot of positive changes, kind of working towards more inclusion and more diversity in mine action. And I also noticed that the last question, I did not address COVID. So I will very, very briefly discuss COVID in our operations, which is to say that like HALO, like MAGS, like a lot of the other organizations out there, the operations that our dogs have been involved in, did suffer a bit in 2020 as our partners were trying to figure out the best way to safely deploy. So that was something a challenge that we did encounter. And then our CHAMPS program, of course, students being for the most part remote, and many of them still are. That was an extra challenge, particularly in countries where students don't have access to internet at home. And so how do you work around it, and really the flexibility and adaptability, I think, would be our primary lesson learned. And then the last thing I will just say is we're involved in a project that's also funded by State Department, the Mine Free Sarajevo project, with the ITF and the Mine Detection Dog Center in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And that program, we did have a little bit of setback, just again due to COVID, trying to figure out how how to do this safely and how to deploy the team safely. But I'm happy to say that we're nearly there, and I believe we will be concluding those operations later this month. So that's really awesome news, and very grateful to state for their support in getting Sarajevo free of landmines once and for all. Thank you.
That is great news. The progress that has been made, both in reaching the goal of doing a lot of clearance in a lot of countries. I mean, there's been just tremendous progress made, and also in the whole way that the mine action community operates. I mean, it really, I'm sort of the scholar of me, that the professor, the idea that I've seen this development over 30 years of this field of practice, and it's really taken on an interesting shape. It's got standards, it's got much more, I don't want to say uniformity, because every situation is a little bit different, but the idea that gender and age data collection based on gender and age is standard now. It's very, and it wasn't 15 years ago, 10 years ago. And so there have been some real interesting developments. But enough of that. We have one last question, and a lot of our audience are JMU students and students from elsewhere, and young professionals who will be looking to their career options going forward here. And you all are wonderful examples of women who have navigated that and been very successful at that. So what could you, what kind of advice and what kind of lessons, what kind of advice could you give at this point that might be helpful to students and young professionals who are on the cusp of their career and are interested in working in international humanitarian assistance sector, whether it's mine action specifically or some other humanitarian assistance field? Emma, would you like to start us off this time?
Sure. So two things come to mind for me, and I think this applies to any field that you might be interested in going into. But the first is to make connections and do your homework. So by making connections, I mean that I think most people end up getting jobs, be it your first job or a job later in your career, through relationships that they build. And I'm sure that in the course of your classes at JMU, people talk about networking, right? This is a buzzword. But truly, I mean, it is critically important. And I think that that's the way that you'll hear about opportunities. And it's the way that you will build your network. Even at the State Department, when I first started, some of the people that I worked with are like, Emma, the most important thing is your corridor reputation, who you know within the department and what they think about you, right? So that network is really going to be where you hear about opportunities and where people are willing to stick their neck out for you and take risks. And playing into that, doing your homework. I think the most impressive people that come through, because I think regularly my colleagues and I have folks that contact us, whether they're kids who are in college, whether they're people who are newly out and who are looking to transition into the State Department. We're always doing informational interviews and talking about employment opportunities at state. But certainly the most impressive people who come across our desks, and those who I have seen gone on to employment at the department, are those who have done their homework and come with good questions, have done research on, the State Department itself, understand what the office is that I or a colleague works in. That's just a way to set yourself apart and to show how it reads to someone who might potentially hire you, is that, hey, this person has initiative, they're willing to do the work, and they really actually mean business. And so, 6 months from that first conversation, if a job comes across someone's email, they think, oh, there was that really impressive person who knew about the State Department and had done some homework, and I didn't have to just tell everything to them. It wasn't just a blank conversation. It was a real discussion. You will much more quickly come to someone's mind. I know I had it sort of a mentoring, got connected with a girl who was in her senior year of college, and she stayed in contact with me, and not in a pushy way, but she sent me her resume and would check in, was consistent in her follow-up. And 2 years later, now she works at the State Department. And it wasn't because of me, but it was because, I kept her in mind. She kept me appraised of her career. She started with Booz Allen, heard about an opportunity at State. I connected her with someone, and it's a good story. It makes you feel good. And so I think making your connections and doing your homework when you make those connections are two things that will serve you very well.
Elise?
All excellent points that Emma has made, and those are a couple of points that I had also had in the back of my mind that I thought would be great advice. Obviously, I'm here because of JMU and the FKD Fellowship, which I think is a pretty unique opportunity in that it's paid, in that it's in this really interesting sector. I don't know how many other fellowships like that exist in the world. So I feel very lucky that I was able to have that fellowship, which, led directly into the work of my current organization. So that being said, seeking out opportunities like that, really keeping your eyes open, but both through, networking opportunities, with your professors, maybe other students in your classes. That's all very helpful, because having an opportunity like that fellowship, was really a career starter for me. And then one other thing that I would add kind of to what Emma was discussing about really doing your homework, which I would also say is very, very important, is to, and this, I'm not trying to sound like a career counselor, but really do have several people check your resume and provide you with feedback, honest feedback about your resume, because I've looked at many resumes, and we've been looking at hiring people, and want something pretty concise. I'm not looking for 5-6 page kind of resume, and kind of think about buzzwords that are going to pop out to people who are reviewing your resume. Same thing with the cover letter. Make sure that it's very well written. This is going to be a way for you to stand out in the international affairs, international assistance sort of arena. There's a lot of writing that we do as a general rule, unless you're a budget person. But really honing your writing in your cover letter, your resume, and then also, even though it's kind of a silly kind of exercise, very helpful, do practice interviews with people, and not only in person if that's really permissible, but over Zoom. Doing it over Zoom, over video call. Try it both with camera and without, because you never know, and a potential employer might not want to be on camera that day, and you might have been preparing for camera, and oh, by the way, I'm talking into a black void. So sort of kind of set yourself up with having experience, in doing different kinds of mock interviews. And it could be with, I know that JMU has great career counseling services, so look to that, or ask someone who is in a field that you really want to get into. Hey, would you do a practice interview with me, or ask a friend? They're really helpful, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you're in a job interview or something like that, and you just kind of freeze because maybe it's your first one. So definitely, those are just a couple of practical tips that I would say for getting involved in any field, but particularly with the writing and the international humanitarian assistance arena.
I think you both offer some very good practical considerations, things to think about. And I think that's always very helpful. Kristen, would you like to wrap up on this one for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, totally agree with everything that's been said so far. And on the topic of doing your homework, asking the right questions. So, we've established that informational interviews and establishing those connections, really important. But when you think about what are the right questions to ask, well, first of all, if you just Google that, there are lists out there on the internet. That's what I did when I started looking to do informational interviews, or like, what kind of things are going to be questions, and then tailor them based on your research on those organizations. So first of all, do that, start there, but also get beneath the surface. So I just had someone contact me for an informational interview and say, like, how do I get a job? Period, like question mark. Dig deeper. You should be asking people about things that only they can tell you about, what their job and their function and their day-to-day, the things you can't go find on the internet. That's what you should be asking them about, because those are the types of things that then you can bring those things up when you have an interview. You can incorporate them into your cover letter, even for if you're applying to a job that's not exactly the same but similar. To make you seem like you really know what to expect and know what the job is going to be about. So that's just, building off of some of what's already been said. Second point is take your internship seriously. As someone who, went from an intern to moved up the ladder to head of congressional affairs, take these things seriously, because they really can lead to great job opportunities and great recommendations elsewhere, even if it's not with the same organization. But if you're not taking it seriously, then you're wasting that opportunity to utilize those connections and utilize those skills that you could build. And then the last thing I'd say is just being involved in international affairs could look so different. There's so many different options. And so I'd really encourage you, especially if you're just at the start of your career or still a student, to explore, take internships while you still have time and can, to take, 3 to 6 months or that summer internship in an NGO versus government versus maybe even a corporate position, something in the field, something domestic to support. I do advocacy work. Do you want to do fundraising? There's so many different things you could do. So really ask yourself, am I more of a generalist? Am I more of a specialist in a particular geographic region? Kind of map out, what are your skills? What are the areas you're passionate about and interested in? And kind of what sector appeals to you? Because there's going to be big differences between government, NGO versus private sector. So take all of those things into account as you're trying to forge your path, explore a little bit, and that'll help kind of set you on the right path. And sometimes having an internship that you aren't crazy about is actually a really valuable thing to say, ooh, that wasn't for me, but I'm glad I tried it. Now I know, now I kind of can pick out what I liked and didn't like, to help me, select an internship that might be more appropriate next time around. So those are just some thoughts. I hope they're helpful.
Yes, I think all of your comments and your advice from all three of you are very helpful. All evening here, I've been taking notes about various things. So I'm always learning something too here. So thank you so much for joining us this evening and for your candor and for sharing so much about your experiences. I know it is just very helpful for students to hear from people working in the field and what the experience has been. We do have time for a couple questions, and I've got a couple really interesting ones here, and hopefully we can work several of them in. All right, here we go. As a graduating physics major, I'm moving onto a field which is historically and currently largely composed of men. As a man, what could I do to help colleagues who are women feel more welcomed and or valued in the workforce? Or would not doing anything special accomplish this? Who would like to take that one first?
Well, I can say something to start. This is from David, right? I got the little chat window up here, but I would just say initially, the fact that you're even asking this question, I think is an indication that you will be successful in this. I think the male colleagues that I've worked with that I have seen do this really well are those that treat everyone the same. And when they see certain voices being excluded, they make a point to ask a question. They make a point to bring those folks to the table. And so I think it's really about being aware about, knowing your surroundings and see sort of how different power dynamics are playing out in the particular office that you might be working in at the time, because it changes from office to office, right? Depending on what personalities are there, things that you think might be a problem in one place that you deal with totally different issues, in a different place, or as new people come and go and whatnot. So just being cognizant of your surroundings and how, who speaks up, who doesn't, who asks questions, who doesn't. I think that those are just things to constantly, if you're aware of it, you're going to be more in tune to it. And then you can be in a position to ask questions and to ensure that the right people are at the table, or at least that people have an opportunity to have their voice heard, that there's space for them. So that's what I would say.
I would absolutely have to agree with that, because I think workplaces can vary widely, and you really just have to be attuned and you have to be aware and ready to respond to what the the dynamics. And I think it's a very great, very good point. Elise or Kristen, would either of you like to add to this? Or
happy just to add on a little bit to what Emma already outlined. So, as you're noticing the power dynamics and ways that those are unequal sometimes, or people who, you perceive to not feel comfortable speaking up for whatever reasons, first thing is just listen, give space for those people, as Emma kind of already identified, but also echo ideas that sometimes unfortunately don't get heard. I know there's probably a lot of people who have had a situation where a woman raises an idea, not really any response, then a man raises the same idea, and then all of a sudden it's this brilliant new thing. And so, when that happens, being able to say, oh, actually that was so-and-so's idea, in a way that gives credit where credit's due, or, if you're, assigned credit to something that your female counterpart or non-male binary identifying individual did, making sure to say, oh, so-and-so did that work actually, and just giving that credit it makes a huge difference. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I would just add that I would underline the word listen. I was kind of internally smiling when Kristen was saying, if a woman says something and doesn't get any response, and then a man will say the same thing 5 minutes later, and everyone thinks it's a great idea. So just really listening. I mentioned one before and earlier in our conversation about, I really do believe there are sort of different communication styles between men and women, and as a general rule, and so maybe just being a little bit more attuned to women's communication styles, and being responsive to that, and really listening and responding, echoing kind of what they said.
the next question somewhat relates to what we were just talking about. So see if there'd be anything additional you would want to add at this point. The question was, we've been talking about impact of gender in your work, but what has been the most difficult aspect of working in a male-dominated sector? Got a lot of people thinking here. And if we want to go to the next question, then come back to that if you feel like you want to think a little bit more about that. But if someone has,
well, I'll say something, Suzanne. I mean, I don't know. Can I give an alternate? Can I say what's been the most fun about it? Because I, like Elise and Kristen have mentioned, have certainly, I would say most of the meetings that I've been in during international travel, when I've been to the field to visit with our partners, I'm 9 times out of 10 the only woman at the table. And certainly the most rewarding part has been able to ask questions and put people in their place and say, no, I'm sorry, sir, that may be what you think, but that is not what we're going to do. So that's been really fun. And I've enjoyed doing that. But so I think, but the challenge for me, the greatest challenge is, and I say it as a challenge, but being taken seriously. I mean, I happen to be quite a short, bubbly, pretty energetic person, and I'm showing up to the field with D-minors who, have all generally haven't had military backgrounds. They've been doing this for a really long time. Like, oh, here's this little whippersnapper. She doesn't know what she's talking about. But by doing homework and by being prepared, he was like, well, no, actually, I do. And here's what we're going to do. So that it's a challenge, but I would say any of the challenges have been really fun to overcome. And I think that's something that women do well. Give us a challenge and we'll show you how we can overcome it.
Yeah, and I would add it's pretty character building. Doing some of the traveling, similar to to where some of the places that Emma has been, where I might be the only woman, and I'm covered from head to toe, and trying to, it's definitely character building, and I think it definitely makes you. It's challenging being put in different cultural contexts where gender is really an issue. But I do think that it's given me a lot more experience in terms of being flexible and being adaptable and just being able to, I have my mandate, I know what I'm here to do, and figure out different ways to communicate my point across. And I might have to take a couple of different routes to get there. If that's being super direct, or if it's going, sort of beating around the bush and just trying to feel out, how things go. So it can be very challenging. It can be quite demoralizing, but I think at the end of the day, it makes me and Emma and Kristen and everyone else, Suzanne, who works in this sector, stronger, because we're quite a bit more adaptable as a result of the different situations that we've worked in.
I would also add, culture is so important. And I think that if you just have that feeling that you're in a work culture where it's more male dominated, it's going to impact the way you communicate it, the way you communicate, as Elise kind of has talked about, and the way you behave. And I just have to say, I think I've been most successful when I just try to be myself more than anything, especially because no matter what field you're in, chances are relationship building is going to be a critical part of that. And especially that's the case doing advocacy work, where I'm really trying to build meaningful relationships with staff and with many folks and partners. And that requires authenticity, and you can't fit into another mold and be authentic. So I guess that's one of the challenges that sometimes I have struggled with is, how to be this version that I think I need to be. And honestly, it usually just works best when you kind of do it your way and what feels right for you. Of course, with with some caveats, I'm sure for some folks, but yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
And one last question here, and something that I've been thinking as you've been talking about as well. Over time, as you've worked in the field, what kind of changes have you seen as far as responses to your gender? But I'm also wondering, age as a young woman compared to somebody's more my age as a woman. I think there is again a intersectionality there. When you're talking about youth plus being a woman, I think that's got to be an added dimension to navigating this more male-dominated field. So I'm just wondering if you have any particular things to add to that thought.
Well, I always remember being towards the end of my fellowship year at State at WRA, being on a program assessment visit in Senegal and Guinea-Bissau. And I had been assisting the program manager who, for medical reasons, was not cleared to travel. So I ended up going over as sort of the lead with another person from the office there with me. And so I'm this 21, 22-year-old who's done a lot of homework and been in contact throughout the course of most of the year with the implementing partners, for the State Department program in both of these countries. But just really thinking, oh my gosh, I'm too young to be doing this. I should, but I was encouraged, the State Department, they sent someone else with me, so I wasn't going to be going, to these meetings by myself. But certainly, that was a scenario where I realized, well, I am just so young, and to be a woman and to be, in Senegal and Guinea-Bissau, these West African countries, and doing this program assessment visit, it was just kind of a, wow, this is really great and this is cool, but also scary at the same time, because, I'm so young. And so that's just one example I give of, sometime in my career, and there've been multiple times where I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so young to be doing this. But very grateful for the opportunities, and there are a lot of wonderful people who work in the sector. So that's just one quick story.
I'd add on that, I remember going to networking events years ago and just being so intimidated. And I got some really useful advice that people want to help. Generally speaking, most people want to help. They want to talk to you. And certainly, you know, when people ask for informational interviews or reach out to me, you know, I'm always happy to chat with them. You know, schedule permitting, I'm always happy to make time and try to be helpful. And so, you know, if you've done your homework and you kind of know the theme of whatever event, however you ended up in that room and who's going to be in that room, generally speaking, you know, don't be shy. Have confidence in going up to strike up a conversation, because most of the time those people are going to be friendly and helpful. And who knows, maybe it'll be the perfect person for you to talk to. You know, I've definitely had lots of emails that ended up in meetings, and gosh, just some relationships that really built out of nowhere, just because I had the courage to walk up and, you know, nervously introduce myself and start talking. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of things that I would add to that I think sort of Elise and Kristen have mentioned, but you know, people wanting to help, people also love to talk about themselves. And so asking questions, right, I think is really huge. And for me, I have often told people that I feel, discrimination is a strong word, but I feel like I've been judged in my career more for my age than actually my gender. I'm not sure why age has always stuck out to me more. Maybe it's because when I would go to the field, most of the people that I'd be traveling with or counterparts would be significantly older than me. And that just felt like a bigger gap than our gender did. And I think part of that too is because you think, well, if someone has, you know, 10 or 20 years of experience on me, they must know so much more than me. And that may be true in the specific field that they're in. But the reality is, you know, you've been hired for a purpose and you're serving a role with your organization. You know, whether you're a student, whether you're an intern, whether you're a fellow, whether you're a brand new hire, you've been chosen for a reason and you have skills. And so to remember that you retain all of that and allow that to give you the confidence to be able to, hey, say when you don't know something and ask that question. I certainly, view people more positively when they say, "Hey, I don't understand that. Could you explain that concept?" And 9 times out of 10, everybody around you, there are people around you who also don't know what's going on. So you asking the question allows for other people to get information too. Like you're not the only person that doesn't know what's happening. It's a shared experience, not everyone. So I think that is just a thing to keep in the back of your mind. It's certainly something that I continue to practice even today when I'm stuck in State Department meetings where people are just pontificating with diplomatic speak, and I'm like, okay, hold on, can we dumb this down for a minute? Slow down. Let's speak in layman's terms, which is always fun to break it down. So that's just a few more thoughts.
Well, I think that is about our time, but this has been a really lively and fun and I think very productive conversation we've been having on this topic. I know I've really enjoyed it, and I thank you all so much for taking the time to join us this evening, Kristen and Emma and Elise, and our audience for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to back to Brenna to wrap up things this evening. But again, thank you so very much for joining us, and best wishes to you. Great to see you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, all the panelists. So as we're wrapping up the event tonight, our panelists will be able to take a break and enjoy the rest of their evenings. We will now be showing a PowerPoint slide for those students that need a passport event stamp. This slide will be available for the next 10 minutes or so. So please take a screenshot for it for your class. And thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone. All right. Thanks for your patience. You should see the slide now, everyone.